Hello, today is Wednesday, June 11th. Welcome to episode 463 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member and I recently discovered distinguished fellow Lester Munson. I'm joined today by NSI senior fellows Matt Hayden, Joshua Huminski, and Jeffrey Wells. No junior fellows today, people. We're going high level. I want to talk about a story that was in the Washington Post a couple of days ago about what is happening in sub-Saharan Africa. There was a long piece article about the rise of terrorist groups in the Sahelian region of West Africa. I'm going to try to pronounce the name of this organization, and then my colleagues here can correct me. Jama'at Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, which is a umbrella group for various local terrorist groups in countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali in West Africa. This group, we're going to call it JNIM, is increasingly controlling territory. It is killing people. It is engaging in terrorist acts against the civilian population, but it is having a great effectiveness in its efforts because local governments don't really know how to respond. They fight back by killing innocent people. It only feeds the argument of this terrorist group that they're the ones who truly represent the people. It's a crazy situation. But what we're seeing is the growth of kind of an African ISIS, if you will, that actually has territory across countries. It has largely taken over huge swaths of Burkina Faso, which is a landlocked country in West Africa, not really on the tip of anyone's tongue or the tip of anyone's brain in the United States. But the issue for us is the U.S. has been withdrawing from the region over the last couple of administrations. Certainly the Trump administration has issues where it does not have a U.S. presence in the world and is willing to cut back on activities, programs, personnel. The previous administration, the Biden administration, had this problem as well. We lost a key drone base in Niger during the Biden administration. So this is, I don't necessarily want to get political here, one side or the other. This is more of an issue of when the U.S. withdraws from the world, bad things happen. This terrorist group, JNIM, has now got a big swath of territory, controlling a certain amount of the population. Notably, France has also been withdrawing from the region in part because of its colonial legacy, but also just kind of mismanagement of the current politics. Matt Hayden, I want to go to you first here. Talk about prioritizing the fight against terrorism and what the consequences are here for the U.S. when we kind of take our eye off the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that happens when we switch from counterterrorism being our number one priority to being one of our top 3 priorities, when we start advocating for resources and capabilities and collection for nation state and elevate that to kind of the same level as counterterrorism or escalate that balance in some way, we start to have a challenge of where can we be all at the same time. And so you start to see things where we traditionally don't have a presence escalating and moving up. And you're going to see this administration start to look at those type of events and say, okay, where are our partner states? Because we've got our eye on things like the conflict with China, on the issues in Ukraine, on all of these hot button topics right now. How can we take our eye off those conflicts to address this one? Is the easy answer from this administration is where are our partners so we can support them as a second party, third party kind of arrangement. But it is a challenge to say counterterrorism isn't a priority. I would say it is. It's now balanced across a large set of objectives that aren't as isolated as they were, say, for example, post 9/11.
Joshua, there's a ton of issues here. We're only going to do this podcast for like 10 or 11 minutes. And so people, if you really want to do a deep dive in this, look at the Washington Post article, do some other research. There's just a lot of stuff to unpack here. Joshua, can you talk about the role of the Russians and the Wagner group in the region? Because that's also been a big factor here.
Yeah, absolutely. The Wagner group under Prigozhin was very active across the African continent, but particularly in the Sahel, supporting autocratic regimes, providing security training and assistance, as well as disinformation and misinformation. They were supporting the effort to push the French out of Niger. and supporting kind of autocratic regimes across the region. Obviously, with the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Kremlin taking over a lot of the Wagner Group's actually activities and creating what is now called the Africa Corps, is much more directly controlled by the Kremlin and by the Russian intelligence community. What's interesting is Wagner has found itself under significant pressure in Mali recently, saying they've basically declared mission accomplished and are leaving, although the Africa Corps, which is the successor to Wagner, remains there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the interests of certainly the private military companies and the Kremlin adapt to this new environment. You're finding the shortcomings of these Russian groups and PMCs that are really good at supporting autocratic regimes, but not necessarily good at conducting counterterrorism or counterinsurgency operations. And when it becomes too costly, you couldn't quite see some of these groups pulling back as Wagner has done.
Jeffrey, another issue is how these groups are funded, how they get the resources they need to do the things they do. Can you talk about that angle for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Pink Floyd, I always have to drop these in, right? Yeah, once said, "Hey, money, it's a gas," and I think if we follow the money here, is literally for JNIM. Gas is precisely how they're fueling this so-called insurgency. I mean, yeah, this region is rich in natural resources, and they're exploiting those natural resources both for criminal activity and which is why I think there's some politics involved with Wagner and others. But this is not just about terrorism; it's about criminal organizations. I mean, they're running artisanal gold mines across Burkina Faso and Mali. They're extorting huge amount of zakat taxes from terrified villagers for so-called in They're cattle rustling for profit. They're kidnapping for ransom. I think it was last year alone in some of the research I saw, that experts are saying that they've tens of millions of dollars that they've been able to already extract globally to buy rifles, bribe officials, and recruit more foot soldiers. And I think that this the illicit gold wins it ends up in legitimate markets, muddying our supply chains and crippling a lot of the sanctions that we're trying to use for some of these other geopolitics. And I think that this is a bit of a problem, mostly because we're now seeing kind of this reverse in a darker blood diamond economy that sanctions really are going to have a challenge choking off. And from a U.S. standpoint, I think the financial connection really is a direct threat to us. More money means more sophisticated weapons, remotely IEDs, sophisticated plots against Western interests, which all those natural resources are within our national interests. I think that Treasury Department is kind of has its hands tied a little bit here, trying to keep track of the ignits and offshore accounts. This is kind of a whack-a-mole game for them, and I don't know that we truly have a cure for this, because traditionally combating illicit finance is very difficult. But and especially I think now, kind of post Doge, post U.S. aid cuts, is how are we going to use our soft influence? How do we use U.S. Customs and Treasury advisors and officers in kind of West Africa to really intercept a lot of this this illicit shipments and expand sanctions to cover the key financiers, which are operating out of Dubai or Doha or Moscow. So if we strip away the gold, we starve the fiefdom of JNIM and their criminal so-called freedom fighting.
I'm gonna throw out a couple of other points here. One, the current administration said I wouldn't get political here, so we won't name names necessarily. The current administration is generally pulling back from the African continent, where the Africa Directorate at the NSC is going to be merged into the Middle East Directorate. There's no one been nominated to be Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. There's talk of having the Africa Combatant Command merged into the European Command, which was the way things were run 30 years ago. So there's a lack of interest. There's a lack of thought that this is a priority. some of that is kind of understandable. I mean, who's even heard of Burkina Faso? But here's the second point. Letting the bad guys have a region of territory they control always works out poorly for the United States. 9/11 happened because we looked the other way when the Taliban and Al Qaeda were basically running Afghanistan after they were partially running Sudan. So the territory itself, the particular nature of it doesn't necessarily matter, but giving terrorists a platform, inevitably they're going to come after the United States. We're the big guy on the block. If they hit us, it enhances their stature around the world. That's what their goal is. It is inevitable that they will come after U.S. interests. It is vastly better that we spend a little bit of money now to have a presence in the region and work on this rather than let it explode into a much bigger problem later. That's my view. We learned this lesson 25 years ago, 24 years ago, the hard way. I'm worried we're going to have to learn it again the hard way. Okay.
Did we really learn the lesson? I think probably a different fault line conversation.
Well, we may have forgotten. I think we learned it for a while, and then I think we forgot. Or we're hoping that it isn't, that the world has changed or something, or human nature has changed, which, of course, it has not. That may be more of a theological issue than a
same as it ever was
national security one. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks so much to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, Claude Jennings, the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, June 13th, Friday the 13th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We are now on YouTube, and you would be able, if you were watching on YouTube, you would know that Matt is the only guy without a beard here. I don't know what his problem is. So check out our channel there for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.